Good evening. I want to be respectful of our start time a little bit. Hello, my name is Kathleen Bodine, Superintendent of Schools in Arlington. I'm very proud of that. I'm stepping in this evening for Jeff Thielman, who couldn't be here tonight. Jeff is the chair of the school committee and chair of the Arlington High School Building Committee. So I'm here to welcome all of you and tell you basically what's going to happen tonight, and then we'll move forward with the next speaker. So tonight is the second of 4 forums we have to involve the community. And we have a unique record already. This is 2 for 2, having to be on a snow date. So when our communications subcommittee met this morning, we said, you know what, we've got to get a snow date for the March 5th one, Monday, March 5th. And we will. We don't quite have that established yet, just in case, but I think that our record so far might say do that. So in these forums, in the first forum, we had a discussion about the Msba process. We looked at what we like about Arlington High School, we don't like, what are opportunities in this rebuild, and it was a very lively and great discussion. A lot of the comments you have in a packet at your table. Simultaneous to these forums, we've also had a visioning group that is composed of members of the community, town officials, educators, students, the faculty, and looking again at the educational vision. What do we see as the vision for the high school, and trying to look down the next 5 years, 10 years, and well beyond that. And that's actually the purpose of this evening, is that we've been working with this group, but we also want to involve more members of the Arlington community in that discussion. And we've also been thinking about different ways that for those that are not able to be here tonight, how they can get their comments to us as well. So in terms of a timeline of what we're doing, we are working right now gathering all this information to write an education plan for the high school. And from that plan comes the space requirements necessary for the school. And of course that also is in combination with what are allowable under our partnership with Msba. The timeline for the work that we're doing is this. We're in a feasibility study right now, and there's a very tight timeline to create this educational plan. This work will be going on after tonight's session. We need to have a first draft done in early March. The school committee will approve the report March 15th at their school committee meeting. This report then there's another aspect to it, which is actually the space study. This report will be delivered to Massachusetts School Building Authority mid-April. Simultaneous to this, the architects on the project are looking at, we're looking at other possible sites, which is a requirement in the process, and will be more discussion at the April 4th community forum about that. We are also simultaneously looking at what would it mean to just renovate the school? What would it look like to have a renovation and addition, and possible several scenarios in that perhaps, and also what would the cost of a new high school be? And of course that means probably where is the issue. And that, after that complete study, that preferred option will go to Msba in early July for an August board meeting. And once we have an agreement and what is going to be the preferred option for the high school, architects will then begin the schematic drawings. That process will again involve more people as we move forward in that. But to go beyond that will require a debt exclusion override, and that would probably be timed for late spring next year. Assuming a positive vote of the town, the next step in that would be to develop construction drawings, which will take about a year. So probably the earliest we would actually begin any construction or even setup of the site would be the late spring of 2020. But those are just rough timelines of where we are. All of the information that we give the high school building committee, anything that's generated from these forums or the visioning group, all of that is on the high school building website. And you have information at your table as to how to access that. You also can sign up for alerts that will be automatically sent to you. But it's a process where we want to involve the voices of everybody in the community, because at the end of the day, this is Arlington, the town of Arlington's high school. And everybody needs to participate in the process to the level that they are able to. So tonight we are focusing on the educational plan. And we're going to take great notes on this, because after this, the high school principal is going to be the primary author, but we're tasked with writing this report over the next few weeks. So tonight, the first speaker will be our facilitator in this process, is David Stevens from New Vista Design. He's been working with our architects and has facilitated the recent visioning. And for some of you who were at the Gibbs visioning a year ago last September, he was the facilitator for that discussion. So he is going to lead us through the rest of the evening. And Dr. Matthew Janger is going to talk about the high school program now and as we look to the future. Following that, we're going to have an opportunity for some discussion at the tables. There will also be a question and answer session, which Joe Curl, our chair of our select board, soon to be, will be handling other questions and answers. So we have our architects here, and I want to introduce them. Lori Coles, and I think Melissa is here, Miss Green, and Arthur Duffy over here from HMFH. And then from Skanska, we have Chuck Adams, and some of the other team members were here earlier today, but were not able to stay for the evening. They had all planned for the last one we had. So I welcome all of you. Thank you for being here. Your input is so important to this process, so thank you. So I'm going to turn this over now to David Stevens.
Thanks, Kathy. Can we get the... Okay, good evening, everybody. Yeah, my name is David Stevens. I'm part of the HMFH team. I'm what's called an educational programmer. So I have a background, actually, I started out as an architect and then left the field for 20 years, became a teacher and then a high school principal. And then got back into architecture through the process of looking at how do we design forward-thinking buildings that aren't going to be obsolete within 10 years, because things are really changing rapidly in certain ways in the way we think about teaching and learning. So I'm going to talk for just 15 minutes about some of those big picture themes that come up. Now, I've done quite a few projects with HMFH, but I work with a variety of architects in Massachusetts on quite a few MSBA projects. But I also work nationally, and I work with independent schools and charter schools as well as public schools, and I can tell you that they're all thinking about the same thing. How do we give kids the goods? How do we make sure we're creating well-rounded, educated, and citizens who are interested in learning, who find something that they're passionate about, who gain a level of confidence in their ability to be a thinker, and who go off into college and career in a feeling really positive about their opportunities. So the process itself, the visioning process, is something that the MSBA used to suggest and now pretty much requires in most of its buildings, because they really do want to make sure that schools are thinking very carefully about how they can use this opportunity to move their program forward. Now, the building is not the change. You can have an amazing building and not so great a program, and more often you see great programs and really, buildings that have a lot of challenges. So it's really about the program. But what the building can do, hopefully, is to help the district and the school take their agenda forward and grow into it in some exciting ways. So this process is something that engages core leadership from the district and the school, as well as the educational visioning group that Kathy was telling you about, as well as the community and the faculty. And we've just engaged in 3 sets of workshops, each of them 4 hours long. The first one focused on learning goals and best practices. For us, we need to learn as much as possible about Arlington High School and the district and what you value as quickly as possible. And so we had some deep conversations about sort of what you value there. Matt's going to be going into some more detail about the programming that's going on there. And then in the second workshop, we connected that to ideas about how space can be used and what kind of features can allow certain things to happen in a school, to see what was really resonating with and exciting the folks in the group. We then translated that into a set of guiding principles and priorities. So these are all in process right now. And then today, we just came from doing a series of activities that looked at bubble diagramming and adjacencies, and how can we sort of begin to really get some of our priorities, our guiding principles, put them into effect. So people rolled up their sleeves and they got to be designers today. So we're trying to learn as much as possible about what the school values. This is all part of language we're putting together for the educational plan that Matt will be working on and his colleagues. And the MSBA really wants to make sure that there's a really coherent narrative that gets created around what the school would like to see happen, about the programs they have now, what they envision for the future, and how that translates into them using the MSBA template of space in the most creative and effective way possible. We're also building off of a lot of the work that has already been done within the district. This is a very thoughtful district and school, and so we are trying to see sort of what all the groundwork that's been laid. We know you have your Vision 2020 process that's been going on. There's a lot of innovative work that's going on at the high school, so much of which is going on in spite of some of the spaces there. So that's something we've been real interested in as well. And we also, as Kathy said, we did work on the Gibbs recently. So this process, we're kind of comparing notes with what were some of the big picture values that were expressed there. But I'm going to talk now just for about 10 minutes on what do we mean by future-ready schools, or what do people think about when they think about future-ready schools. And I think the main point here is that many schools, they have a culture, they have traditions, they have a framework that is really working for them. And it's all about how do we get kids literate? How do we give them the basics, make sure that in terms of the traditional 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic, we're really checking off those boxes. In the 90s, we started thinking a lot about another set of R's, rigor, relevance, and relationship. And that was really the beginning of thinking about how do we educate all kids? And how do we make sure we meet them where they're at? How do we make sure that they're known well, that they're not slipping through the cracks? And that we are using multiple modes of kind of trying to teach them. Now, the 4 C's is something that has been coined by the Partnership for 21st Century Skills. And they're really not just 21st century skills, but this is a framework that has been adopted nationally and is very much Common Core and MCAS 2 very much have these embedded within them. And they're really higher order thinking skills, what people might talk about as soft skills. So I think if nothing else, the theme is here that schools are trying to get to working with their kids on these higher order thinking skills and trying to give them the experience of being more proactive as learners at the same time as trying to ensure that their basic skills and skill building is being addressed. And another C that, so the C's are critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity. And then another C that a lot of schools add is citizenship, because really we want to create our schools as democratic institutions where students have the experience of being part of a community. Another theme is that, well, project-based learning has been around for a long, long time, and sometimes it comes more into fashion or less into fashion in educational circles. There's definitely a renewed interest in how do we give kids the experience of applying content that they are learning, because that's really the only way that we can give them practice at those 4 C's. So the idea of either project-based learning, problem-based learning, internship-based learning, inquiry-based learning, it has lots of different names, but many schools are trying to figure out how to do that. How much time can they take from delivery of content, or how do they find the balance between delivering content in more traditional ways and in more hands-on and applied ways? And finally, growth mindset is something that a lot of educators are talking about. This is based on Carol Dweck's work about developing a mindset in which you see that if you work hard and you try hard, even if you fail, and especially when you fail, that's when you learn. So we need to make it safe for students to try and fail and try things that they don't even think they're good at. So developing that growth mindset. And so what that looks like in schools, schools are trying to be more student-centered, meaning the student is at the center of their own experience. It's not just happening to them. They're making choices along the way. They're constructing their own learning. There is a lot of thought about how do we become more interdisciplinary, even on the high school level, which tends to be very departmentally organized, because projects and problem-based learning really are interdisciplinary endeavors. Technology infusion. We know that technology is a tool that we want to have readily available. It really opens up the possibilities in a school of using every square inch of space within the school. So no longer do you have to be confined to a classroom. Spaces like cafeterias or the media center, there can be lots of different venues for students to be interacting with information individually or in small groups. Differentiating instruction is another theme. We're trying to reach learners where they're at. We have many students that are English language learners or have individual education plans. We're trying to meet those needs. Oftentimes what that means is you have multiple teachers in a classroom so that you have a co-teaching model. So we need to have flexible classrooms to accommodate for that. Community connections, leveraging the resources of the community is another thing, and that has a lot to do with exposing kids to the adult world that they're about to enter, but also using the expertise and mentorship of adults in the community. And then STEM and STEAM, STEM being science, technology, engineering, and math. A is adding the A for arts. I like to think of it as arts and humanities. Really, it's a meta-discipline, sort of a way of approaching curriculum that's more interdisciplinary. And there's certainly been a lot of attention to that. And then finally, process and product-oriented programs. Instead of just thinking about summative assessments, taking a test, we're looking at what's the process that kids are going through to learn, how are we helping them reflect on that process and learn about themselves as learners. So I'm going to go through these real quickly now, but these are some of the themes that we hit on in our workshops. So a focus on doing, on applying the learning the content that you're learning. Agility and adaptability is a big part of that. Tony Wagner in his book here talks a lot about agility being the single most sort of quality that employers are looking for in their workers. A focus on learning and not on teaching. And that doesn't mean the teacher isn't every bit as important, but we might see the teacher more as a facilitator of students learning to learn. And we can think of schools as more high-performance work environments, really kind of a lot like the workplace in terms of having very varied spaces within it. This is all connected to workforce development and ideas that or what we're seeing about the qualities and the skills that are really being valued in the workplace. And these are all those soft, higher order thinking skills connected to those 4 C's. And this is at the upper end of Bloom's taxonomy. For those of us that are educators, this is sort of the way we look at the knowledge and is sort of the foundation, the knowledge and understanding. But at the upper end is what you do with that. How do you analyze? How do you create? How do you evaluate information? And this is baked into Common Core assessments and the MCAS 2 in terms of English language arts. There's a lot more emphasis on sort of reading and writing across the curriculum and content-rich nonfiction. In math, there's an emphasis on concepts and skills and problem solving as connected to mathematical concepts. Next-gen science standards are all action verbs. They're all about how do you apply the content that you are learning. And then again, the growth mindset, which another set of words that come up around that are kids developing sort of integrity and grit and perseverance and learning to persevere in the face of challenges. Another theme here is social emotional learning, a big emphasis on what about those sort of more maybe right brain skills, the ability to have empathy, to find meaning in things and to create meaning. Blended learning is a big part of the picture here, and that is, this guy Clayton Christensen is saying that in 10 years from now, 50% of the content that gets delivered in schools is going to be online and interactive. And I don't think any of us want to imagine kids just sitting in front of computers like textbooks, but what he's talking about is sort of potentially more virtual learning, immersive, geared towards students' learning styles. So most of the teachers that I work with really want to see technology used as a tool when you need it, where you need it. It works when you need it. It can help. It's not just about consumption. It's about production. You can have 3D printers, and you can have laser cutters and large format color printers, and that allows you to do a very professional level of quality work. So it's about production of technology. But in any case, any buildings that we're creating now, we have to think about how technology will be used within it in multiple ways, and technology that we have no idea yet what it's going to be. So this brings up the notion of anywhere, anytime learning. You can be learning in an outdoor classroom, weather permitting. You can be learning under the stairwell. You can be learning in small meeting rooms or breakout rooms. And we've been talking a lot about, in the process of thinking about the design of this new or renovated Arlington High School, what those breakout rooms might look like and how they might function. It's the idea of extending learning beyond the classroom walls and, again, taking advantage of every square inch in the building. Teaming and collaboration is a theme that comes up. How do teachers collaborate with each other? How do we co-locate classrooms and teacher collaboration rooms so that there's sort of a synergy happening and there's a sense of connection and place? How do we engage students and perhaps have them work in more self-paced and small group kind of contexts? Also build in voice and choice at different points along the way, including students of all different abilities. And what this might look like is that oftentimes classrooms now, they have modular furniture and flexible furniture, and you might see different things going on in a classroom at the same time, and students working on different things in different ways. So differentiated that instruction allows us to also think about how do we personalize the experience for students. We talked about STEM and STEAM. Connected to this, that A in STEAM is the idea that arts, and this could include performing and visual arts, is fully integrated into the curriculum and not necessarily off in one end of the building, but really kind of more accessible. Head in hand, when we think about project and problem-based learning, we want to find authentic community context for students to be doing their work. And this also means that they're creating products that are tangible and that have some value. and we want to be displaying those projects. And we also want to be creating performance-based assessments and potentially venues for performance. Career tech education is also a theme that is very much on people's minds. That's that application. We have seen that many vocational schools, not all, but many are going through a resurgence with families very interested in that sort of connection between what students are learning and how they're applying what they're learning. Health and wellness is another theme that is coming up a lot and came up in our conversations as well over the last few weeks. Building in mental and opportunities to develop mental and physical health, taking a more whole child approach. Outdoor connections is something that came up a lot in our conversations. How do we create not only great natural light within the school, but easy outdoor connections and areas where students can extend beyond the school walls? And then arts integration is connected to STEAM. Design engineering, or engineering thinking, design thinking. Now, there's a makerspace at the school. Many schools are looking at how do they get many of their classrooms to be maker-like classrooms, and that's the idea that students are going through a problem-based learning process, and they're creating products. The design engineering process is a really engaging one. It relates to fabrication and robotics, and that's certainly something that has come up a lot in our conversations. And community partnerships. This connects to looking at the school as a community hub and resource, as well as the adult world connections that are provided. And looking at the school walls as permeable, certainly we're thinking about them as safe, but we want to be thinking about how do kids go out into the community, how do adults come into the community. This is separate but connected to school as community resource, which is another theme that has come up quite a lot. So closing up here, what you see is there's a lot of schools that are trying to figure out ways to do this. And again, it's around finding that balance between some more traditional delivery methods as well as things like senior projects or capstone projects, extended learning opportunities, internships, community service, maybe classroom-focused themes or school-focused themes. And when we're looking at this, the power of this type of approach to teaching, we want to make sure that there's academic rigor there, that there's authenticity, students are applying their learning in active ways, and they're building adult connections and participating in assessment practices that are really varied. There are lots of schools that we can learn from that are doing this. We're going to see a video after Matt talks from one of them. And again, this is something that Arlington High School has been thinking a lot about already, and Matt, I think, is going to, at this point, talk a little bit about that and what it looks like on the ground at Arlington High School.
So one of the things that's funny about a school like Arlington High School is that it is a big, comprehensive high school that looks exactly like the school many of us went to, because it is in fact the same building that many of us went to. But what goes on inside really is already coming from a very different place. So there's a lot of things that would feel very familiar to us, but a lot of things that would feel very different. And I think before I go into any sort of conversation about Arlington High School, I think it's sort of important to put it in perspective. So whenever I get in front of a group of people, I remind them of a few things. We hear a lot of rhetoric about the failure of the American public school, but it is just that, it is rhetoric. It is important to realize that, you know, and if you looked at these international comparisons that people quote, the Massachusetts public school system would be among the top school systems in the world were Massachusetts a country. Within this system, Arlington ranks sometimes in the top 20 schools in the state depending on how you look at it. We're a gold medal school in terms of U.S. News World Report. We're a Washington Post most challenging school. We're a Newsweek. You know, we get these sort of different ratings and rankings. And that doesn't mean that you should sort of sit back and think we can stop right where we are, but it is sort of helpful because I think a lot of the time we come to these conversations as if in some way we are failing or struggling to do what it is we do, when in fact we're actually one of the better public school systems in the world. So things you will, my goodness, I do not know how to use this. That work? Okay. So this presentation that I'm going to go through very quickly is the same presentation that we gave as part of the visioning group that we were talking about, because we felt like it was important for people to really have a sense of kind of all of the things that are going on in the school. When we gave this presentation to the group, many people who work in the high school did not know many of the things that were going on in the school. So I will go fairly quickly actually through the parts of it that you're familiar with. We have the English department, the mathematics department, the history and social studies department, the science program, the world languages, PE, and visual arts and performing arts. But I will say this about each of them. They are very strong departments, and it is a really important thing to realize that. We get a lot of power out of the fact that our departments work closely together. We have had a process of building common assessments, working together to build an understanding of standards, not just to use them as lists of things that are thrown at us, but things we really understand. And then having professional learning communities where those staff work together over time to get iteratively better at delivering the content and really richly understanding the content. So that's happening in the context of a whole lot of other layers of experimentation. About 5 years ago when I came on board, we all looked at the building and said, well, we're going to get a new building any day now, right? So we began what we called the Future Building Committee, which was a pun. It was to build the future for the future building, or to build the future building for the future school. And we were talking about a lot of the programming that we wanted to put in place. And so a lot of the conversations that we've had have been based on that. Sorry, that's more departments. And so many of the things that we've been doing have been really trying to create different kinds of programming, different options of programming to do all of these things. So outside of the core departments, which offer a range of activities and electives going back, we also then have PE. Our PE department does not give the kind of PE classes that we are used to. Our PE department freshman year gives you a fairly standard array of a year-long PE program. But then in the following years, they do things like wilderness survival, winter survival, backpacking, rock climbing, personal fitness, walking, yoga, dance, other programs that are focused on really giving students an opportunity to actually do what physical education is about, which is to learn how to be a better person sort of physically as a lifelong learner. The visual arts department has a wide range of programs: painting, sculpting, mixed media. We're hoping to bring ceramics back next year. The performing arts department, I think many of you are familiar with because that's public, has a wide range of band and instrumental music programs, jazz, orchestra, choral ensembles, digital music technology, as well as our drama program, which teaches both drama classes and then puts on the one-acts, the musical, and the play every year. There are also a lot of other smaller theatrical programs that go forward from there. Family and Consumer Science program has 3 levels of programming. We do the culinary programs, we do the early childhood programs, which make use of our preschool and our daycare, which exist in the building, and we also do the interior fashion design program. The main limit for Family and Consumer Science is we just have had not enough staff. We have about 80 students every year who cannot get into those classes. And that actually is an issue. It will be an issue in the new building because the new building will not get us people. We also need to have more staffing in order to offer many of the curricular options that the kids would like to take. One of the things that we do in a building of our size, we're at about 1,350 students right now. We're expecting to be at about 1,750 students at the time that the building opens. That's the build size for the building. We'll get a little bit bigger after that, depending on whose projections you believe. So in a school of that size, you really want the school to feel small. You want students to have some place where they can connect, where they don't feel lost in this giant building. Generally, research has shown that over clusters of about 500 kids, you really lose any sense of community. And so part of what's happened in the high school is we had 2 deans who both had about 600 plus. This year, we've brought in a half-time dean who will be a full-time dean next year, and so we'll be back down to 3 deans. And the 3-house system really has meant that the deans have switched over this year. There's an appreciable difference where they feel like when they notice a kid has attendance issues or when they notice that a student is struggling in terms of behavior in class, they're able to reach out and do collaborative problem solving with those students, follow up on them with attendance, rather than simply give them a detention and move on because they have to get to so many students. And just to give you an example of kind of the difference in impact, over the last 3 years, just out-of-school suspensions were about 50, 50, and 75. We won't talk about why it spiked last year. We're looking to be more around 35 this year, and this is with more students, but with the deans able to spend more time doing prevention with the students. So it really makes a difference. Within this system, we also have our advisory system, so students meet in homerooms, and then those homerooms have advisory activities, which have mixed levels of success and acceptability, but give you groups of students that meet with the teacher over time. And so between advisory, the house system, the deans, your guidance, the idea is that you have these different levels of places where students can find connection with adults. Obviously, we have the guidance department. We also have social workers. We have 5 social workers in the high school right now, 2 in general education. Those social workers end up meeting with literally hundreds of students every year, sometimes for short check-ins and sometimes for more extended periods of time. Our students, if you look at sort of just the general experience of students, and I don't think this is something that's different, but it is something that we are much more aware of in the modern public school. If you look at students in the various levels of mental illness, trauma, disadvantage, socioeconomic stress, all these different stresses, it's reasonable to expect that roughly a third of the students in front of you are experiencing some sort of significant social emotional stress. Now, back in the day when I was in high school, the graduation rate nationally was 75%. So many of those students who were struggling, they just went away by the time they got to high school. Nationally now, the graduation rate is over 85%. In Arlington High School, it's over 95%. The way that we are going to help those students to succeed and be successful is by being able to connect with them and help them find safe places to learn how to handle themselves social emotionally and be successful in school. So that level of support is something that we put a lot of energy into and often feel a lot of stress around. And it's something that in the new building we really need to think about. Similarly, special education is something which has grown significantly over the last 20 or 30 years. Special education went from something that was sort of for students with very defined disabilities to being something which has grown to be in any number of range of social emotional challenges, specific learning disabilities, and other folks who need specialized instruction to be successful. Special education and access to the school is a civil right. And so it is very important that we are able to help students figure out different ways to access the curriculum. We have a fairly large special education staff, special education programming for students. And one of the things that happens also is when students are not able to be successful in the high school, if we are not able to find specialized instruction for them, those students will often, because it is a civil right, go out of district. The cost of out-of-district placements can be in the tens of thousands. So it is both in the best interest of the students to be successful because they do much better in their home schools with their home community, and for us to keep those students in the school. So as we build expertise and as we have spaces that are conducive to the programming, we're better able to keep more students in our school and serve them better. We also have a growing population of English language learners. Again, similarly, it's a civil right for students to be able to access school in spite of their language or of origin. So if a student is not able to access the curriculum simply because they don't speak the language, we need to figure out how to make it accessible for them. And that's a population which is likely to grow going forward. So one of the really exciting things that we've been working on over the last 5 years is growing what we're calling an interdisciplinary makerspace. And I'm going to talk broadly about a lot of ways in which we're doing blended learning. Technology is really transforming all of education. I often argue that higher education, colleges, are where newspapers were about 15 years ago. Their competitive advantage is no longer content delivery or content ownership. I can get that stuff free online. So they're busily trying to figure out how do they do what it is they do, and what do they want students to want from them, and what do they want students to get from them. One of the things they're doing is building fabulous dining halls and charging us lots and lots of money to send our kids to great sporting programs, because that's what attracts people, but there's also a lot of stuff going on educationally. So what we do in terms of preparing students for that structure is challenging, right? Because it's changing in terms of what kinds of things students need to be able to do. But technology for us does 4 really significant things. It allows us to differentiate instruction in ways that we were not easily able to do before, because I can put completely different texts and materials in front of kids in the same classroom. It allows us to engage students in ways that we weren't able to do before. I can put a headset on a student, which we are doing in some of our classes with virtual reality headsets, and I can have them walk around on Ironsides or in the Parthenon. At the same time, it allows students to produce work, and Mr. Stevens was talking about that before, at a level which is professional. Like, we can turn out professional level materials. We can make furniture that you would want to own and buy. We can contact educators and people across the world. So it connects us and allows us to produce things at a professional level that we weren't able to do before. So right now, we've been using our traditional woodshop as a makerspace. We've added 3D printers, a plotter, a vinyl cutter. We have a 3D, a CNC digital cutter, which will draw your face on a wooden plaque, which AEF helped us purchase. Thanks, shout out to AEF, because they help us with a lot of this experimentation. We have specialty labs, many of which are aging and hard to keep functioning in our current building, but we have a CAD digital media lab. Ideally, those should be two separate labs, but we don't have enough space or materials for them. We have digital music, we have fashion and line, we have culinary, we have surround, we have all of these different specialty spaces that allow students to function at a really professional level. We would like those to be easily accessible, consolidated in a place where teachers and other folks can share them. Right now, particularly in the library media, the library makerspace and in the woodshop makerspace, we have classes in there all the time. In the makerspace, we only teach 2 classes, but the place is busy. If you walk in there at any time during the day, there will be physics students in there, social studies students in there, culinary, people in there making and doing things. And the more people can get access to that, the better. So 2 things that we're doing also in terms of blending that beyond the school walls, which I think are worth noting. One is this STEAM Design Thinking Certificate. We're working on these interdisciplinary certificates. So as students are able to do that kind of connected learning, we want to be able to credential them. We have students making drones. We have students doing all sorts of other interesting projects in their clubs outside of the school. And they can write that on the bottom of their college thing, and they can put it out on the thing, but they're not able to kind of put it together as a large program. And we want them to see the connections. So the idea is to look at cross-cutting standards across the courses and clubs and activities and skills that students do in those areas. And the 3 certificates we're working on, one is Global Competency, which was launched a couple of years ago, which is looking at sort of what do you need to be a globally connected person. The second is the Design Thinking Certificate, which is looking more at STEAM skills. And hopefully in a couple years, we'll work on one related to civics. The other thing that we're doing in terms of blended learning, which has finally, I think, hit its inflection point of really blowing up, is using what are called Moocs. Moocs are massive open source online courses. When I talked about colleges and content, most of the major universities in the world are now putting much of their content and many of their best classes online. You can go online to Coursera or edX, and you can watch lectures by many of the best professors, read their course packets, and share materials with other people. Those are awesome programs. They're using them to sort of figure out how to get themselves in branding. But what they don't do very well is what we do well, which is build relationships, build context, and credential students to actually assess whether they know them. So in our model, teachers or students can propose the Moocs. They put them out with a teacher advisor. The teacher takes the MOOC with the students, and then they meet over whatever period, 4 to 12 weeks for most of the courses, once a week to review the content, to look at the assessments, to work on sort of understanding and putting it in context. There are currently 150 students taking MOOCs at the high school. There are 5 of them, I think, running, although I think there might be more. They are in disaster preparedness, quantum mechanics, quantum mechanics, mythology, criminal psychology, and one other, I can't remember. And it's really amazing. And we keep putting these out, and like there are 80 kids taking the criminal psychology class right now. It does kind of worry me about why, but we won't go into that. And so that relates also to instructional technology. Instructional technology has gone from a few years ago when I was in Maine, so we had one-on-one giving kids very expensive laptops, to now where we really think about beyond one-to-one, because almost every student brings their own little handheld technology device to school with them, which is a very useful and very distracting educational device. as well as, you know, our Chromebooks, our Chromebook carts, our specialty labs. And so figuring out how to make it so that teachers can rely on knowing that they're going to have this level of technology in their class and high-speed internet access and the right structures in order to be able to do it, and the students know that the teachers are going to know how to use it, is a real kind of a dance. We haven't just required everyone to go out and buy a Chromebook, because I would be very upset if I bought a Chromebook and then went to a bunch of classes and discovered I didn't need to bring it. At the same time, at this point, almost all of our teachers have at least some presence on Google Classroom. For many of our teachers, it's pretty much the only place where work is given out, and often the only place where work is collected. And so that sort of digital platform really makes it a lot easier for teachers and students to interact in lots of ways. And when you imagine kind of where we go going forward, that level of being able to connect and knowing how to run conversations online, knowing how to give feedback online, starts to give us much more flexibility to experiment with some of the things that Mr. Stephen talked about, where, you know, students maybe in their junior and senior year don't need to come to school all the time every day, and you could pilot that in smaller groups. In a school of our size and comprehensive in a big community, it's unlikely that we're going to be like some of these smaller boutique schools who are going to decide that's what they do. But it's not unlikely that we might be able to take 100 kids here or 50 kids there and allow them to branch out into things like that. We're already doing that with our internships, which I forgot to mention because there are just too many things. And we'll go on. So that's instructional technology. Other programs, just to mention, we have our MEDCO program, which brings students in to increase diversity from the city. Library Learning Commons is something that we've talked a lot about in a lot of the visioning sessions. I don't know about you, but I went to a library where we used to, when I was in high school, we drove 3 librarians to nervous breakdowns. We were not very nice because we would go in and talk and they would say, shh. Right now, if you go to our library at any time during the day, it is packed with students working and talking about work. It is really kind of impressive. It's like a good learning environment. Some of them are chatting about other things, but there's actually a ton of work going on there. And as soon as, it's actually very funny, we put out the old hall list, so students find out that their teacher's out there before they get a free period, and they run in and get their library passes because the library fills up most periods of the day. But this space, as a larger space, what a library is and will become, is really something that supports all of that kind of blended learning in terms of breakout spaces, classrooms, lecture spaces, places where students can do independent work, study carols, places where students can talk to one another, spaces where students can go and make stuff and have access, places where people can leave things that they can't necessarily do. When we go to these things, extracurricular activities and support programs, many of those things are things that actually rely very much on the library. So extracurriculars, outside of the regular class day, we have athletics, which most people are familiar with. About 2/3 of our students participate in athletics. We have clubs. I was recently talking to the woman who coordinates our clubs. She says we're reaching the saturation point. There are about 70 clubs right now. We don't have enough teachers to advise all of the clubs that kids want to run, so we're trying to double them up. Some teachers do whatever, a few. But one of the things, again, that happens is all of those different activities that students want to run, you know, and some of them are backgammon club and I want to put something on my resume my junior year. But many of them are really quite active in terms of doing service, in terms of being cultural groups, in terms of being interest groups that allow students to experiment and build leadership. We have a speaker club that wants to bring speakers in. We have students that want to work on, you know, cultural competency. We have a whole range of those activities. And right now in our current building, they go off into the building and sort of, it's very hard to supervise them. It's very hard for them to find spaces. Again, an effective community center that could be a library commons that can be easily supervised with lots of spaces will facilitate students expanding much more their own leadership. And then last, but it should have been first, is student leadership. It's the first in the paragraph, but the last up there. Over the last 4 years, our student government has really grown to be a partner in the school. They are committed, there's leadership at every level. The students are really looking at building a safe, supportive, and inclusive school. They're really thinking about the climate of the school and what the school is and what it represents. And so they become sort of teachers and people who really help build that culture in the school. They're going to need spaces, right? They're going to need spaces that they can access at all times in different places. And then again, I talked before about the range of support programs. We have running in the school, the Learning Center, Harbor Shortstop, which is for students transitioning in, or who need ongoing support. We have transition evaluation programs, social workers, extended hours in the library, all of these different programs. Shout out to Arlington Community Education, who also fills the building after hours with all kinds of educational opportunities. And we've been talking to them about how can we expand into using their resources to help us create night schools or summer school. Right now they do ELL classes and GED high-set classes, which is something that really helps some of our students who struggle in the regular day. The preschool and the daycare is located in our building. It's daycare for the staff and the preschool for special education. But we also use that as a facility for our own students to go and access as part of our early childhood program. So that is everything, talking very, very fast and leaving about 50 things out. Thank you, David.
So right now we're going to see about 7 minutes of video that will help to frame a conversation that we'll have afterwards about, what we all think of when we think of 21st century skills or how schools might be changing or need to be changing. This is one of hundreds of videos online. There are many different schools that are trying to create innovative programs. This is a network of schools that's located in San Diego, California, that I was very involved with. I was one of the founders of it. 3 of us that started it actually were from Cambridge Regional Latin High School. And we had the opportunity to start a school there that was really focused on taking the best of academic education, sort of rich content, and the best of vocational hands-on delivery and application, and creating a network that was kind of seamless. We started with one 9 through 12 school. Some people may have seen or heard about a movie called Most Likely to Succeed. It's a documentary film that's been made about 2 of the students in one of the 9th grade classes at one of the schools. So we started with one program. It's now a K-12 network that has 3 elementary schools, 2 K-8s, 4 middle schools, and the rest are high schools. So it serves about 7,000 students in San Diego. And it's just an interesting place because it's a place that really values the work of projects and sees that as a really legitimate way to deliver content. There are about 7,000 people a year that visit this network of schools from around the globe, but mostly from the States, to learn about what they're doing. And it's one approach, it's one kind of school, but this will just give you a snapshot of how it operates.
And to communicate what they've learned. I want the kids' work to be on the wall for 2 reasons. One, because they feel great that their stuff's on the wall, but more that the other students that see it and say, wow, I want to do work like that. So it's like inspirational, and it also makes you feel good about what you've done.
Sometimes you just come in and you think to yourself, I can't believe that 5th graders did that. I can't believe 10th graders did that. That's when you know, wow, we're really kind of getting somewhere.
Hi guys, are you ready? We're gonna have a seat up front. Awesome. So I want to remind everyone what we've talked about already, which is critique, revision, reflection. So you're at one of those stages, one of those points in the process. Through our projects, I feel that students are really engaged in something that they are deeply passionate about. Through that passion, they're learning that much more, and I feel that just enriches their own personal growth. All right, we have 2 more days. Let's do this.
Zoe and I have worked together very closely on the last 2 projects, and I think the one major benefit of the collaboration is that we have 2 different brains, and we really pushed each other to places that we hadn't thought we would go. And what that resulted in was higher expectations for the students.
What are you working on right now?
Right now, I'm actually on my my website, and I was planning on adding a picture of that
It looks much better having the top, you know, your logo.
Yeah.
Did you add an effect?
The fact, oh yeah, I added quite, no, she said add like one more fact, so I did that.
Okay, which one was that?
This one.
Though it is 5 times more likely in men, it affects 1 in every 88 children in the U.S. and tens of millions worldwide. Being able to see their literacy skills in action and then assess how those skills are coming out, that's very important. There's a lot of connections with the digital and 21st century skills that they're using, and it's really wonderful to see the results of that and also push them to be critical about their work and make it even better. Email me your final copy as a JPEG. All right, good job.
We are trying to create projects that have a kind of simple set of entry points, and then students can really kind of flourish in a bunch of different directions. And so for us, that's creating the opportunity for complex thinking and complex problem solving.
Guys, has anybody not gotten their parts yet?
Some motors. Wait, don't drop those.
Every day here, we throw things in front of them that most 14, 15, 16-year-olds don't have to deal with. And that's hard. It's really hard when every day you have a problem in front of you that no one's going to give you the answer to. They'll support you, but they're not going to feed you the answer. And it becomes very natural, hopefully, for these students that when they hit that stuff, it's just second nature. I'm going to make that happen.
So find the measurements across the bottom of your hull.
Okay.
Find the measurements at the deck level or wherever you're going to make the top of the bulkhead. I teach with the physics teacher, and a lot of the projects that we do are integrated physics, some engineering, English, history is all kind of blended together. Biggest thing is make sure the lines are straight.
Okay.
Because over and over again, people keep using it. All that means is 2 points.
Okay.
Right? The project that we're working on is a survey of piracy through ancient into medieval history and a little bit of modern piracy, studying things like the abduction of Julius Caesar, geographic advantage in certain regions over time.
Really snugly, like right up here. And
So your boat goes backwards?
Sorry.
On the physics side, we actually set up a game, almost a tournament, where 30 students are pirates, the other 30 are merchants, and they have very different goals and often different materials, and they actually have to build from scratch radio-controlled boats. See if you can just get a servo working with this guy. See if you can do that in the next half hour.
Okay.
And our boat, when it accelerates, it's gonna dip back a little.
Yeah, but
It'll be a solid I don't know. We might change it.
It all of a sudden gets students so motivated that they now have this kind of endpoint where, oh my God, we're going to actually be able to do a little versus competition and all this, and they almost learn everything by accident on their way to that destination.
For now, let's just put them together as best we can. We've had those, it's just we didn't figure out where they went until yesterday.
The exhibition space will have the dioramas they're making in their humanities class, which are a artistic representation of their chosen piracy topic.
Ideally, to make that, we would use black, yellow, and red, but let's try it. There's a baseline for what we expect students to learn. I want you to be able to write a 6 to 8 page research paper. We want you to learn certain content from your physics course. I want you to know certain elements of history and why they're so important. But I also want you to be able to look at this product that you're working on, whether it's a boat or some other mechanism, and I want you to figure out how to get from point A to B. And we're fairly liberal with class time, allowing the student to sit there and struggle through something so that they get that deeper understanding, that deeper learning experience.
Well, we did the math, right? So all of this together is, 1 kilo.
1,160 grams.
It's heavy. Most important to a project like this is learning to have a sense of pride and ownership of something. They know that at the end of it all, they're going to have a product that a lot of people are going to come see. And experiencing the work and then the production or the exhibition of that work does something to a student. That sense of, I made something really cool and people came and saw it.
And then we'll just fill in these 2 parts with hot glue or something.
We want students leaving this school passionate about something and feeling like they have the skills to explore that passion.
We have visitors here a lot. They get intimidated by when you look around, you see the walls and you see the work that's done and the displays. And a lot of times they have this sinking kind of feeling of, well, this is what you guys do, we can't do that. And I guess my challenge to schools like that is, don't try and replicate the work, replicate the principles behind the work.
Okay. So I think one of the significant things about High Tech High, as we think about on the facility level, you probably notice there's quite a bit of transparency in those buildings, and there's also a lot of stuff on the walls. So it's really aiming to make the process of thinking and doing and learning very visible and palpable, and so they're pretty exciting environments to be in. One of the reasons that people are so interested in visiting this school is because it's working with an extremely diverse cross-section of kids. It's 60% students of color, 50% free and reduced lunch. It's operating on $8,500 per student per year, so it's a fairly low budget compared to many of our schools here, and it's graduating 100% of its kids, and 92% of them are going to college, and 86% are still in college or have graduated within 4 years. So those are pretty phenomenal numbers, and I can just say anecdotally from my own experience of being there, what you see is a lot of very engaged teachers and students that are very, very much kind of like in the process of learning. So we're going to have a discussion at our tables now for the next 20 minutes. What you have, well, actually, before I do that, I want to remember, you have some colored index cards on your table. And any questions that you have or ideas or comments, please put them on these index cards. We'll be collecting them afterwards. The white index cards are for another activity at the end, so don't use that just yet. Also on your table, you have a number of handouts. And it's a lot to take in, but we wanted to just give you some more fodder for your conversations about what you think of as sort of important skills for the 21st century, or for your students to sort of be successful in school and in the world of higher education and work. And these handouts are, you have one handout that has the Arlington High School Learning, Connecting, and Caring. This is a draft document that's being developed about student as, wait a minute, actually that's got this is from the website. This is 21st Century Focus Points across the curriculum. As Matt was talking about, it's the other side that's the draft of the vision as student as learner and the vision of student as citizen, but we're missing the word global there. It should be global citizen. So these are some documents that the district has been putting together. Also, on pages 3 and 4 of this handout, you'll see this is a whole slew of different sort of takes on 21st century skills and competencies that different school networks from around the country have been developing. And there's a tremendous amount of overlap, but we just wanted, one, to drive home the point that sort of many schools are thinking about this and seeing this as a very important conversation. And seeing all the overlap, but also there are different ways that they're expressed and some ways that you might find particularly more meaningful or resonant. So there's that handout, and then there's another handout which is a couple of pages of skills that we have been talking about. This is a document that came out of our workshop, the second workshop that we had when we took, actually it's from the first workshop, talking about learning goals. And so in small groups, people talked about this, and then we sort of tabulated sort of where things were bubbling to the surface. So you might want to take a look at that as well. And finally, I just wanted to share another document, which is also very aligned, which is something that was produced at Arlington's Town Day. The Vision 2020 group had posed these questions and had town folk sort of vote on their take on 21st century skills. So you should have that handout as well. All right, so there's a lot to look at here, but just give those a quick look over, and then in 3 or 4 minutes, I'll give you a little cue then, and if you want to start talking before, you can. but at your small tables, spend about 10 minutes talking about what top 5 skills, mindsets, and character traits you anticipate your kids will need for an evolving future of work and lives as citizens. So we want you to consider what skills they need in their daily work and lives today, and anticipate what future skills you think will be needed. So we'll be asking each small table to put together a list of your top 5 skills that you come to some agreement on as particularly important. And we know there's going to be a lot of overlap, but we want you to interact with this information and see what comes up at your small tables. Okay, just a brief check-in about time here. We're going to take about 4 more minutes to discuss this first question up here. And if you haven't done a little scribing with trying to record for our purposes, it would be interesting for us to see what you're coming up with as what you think of as your top skills. Then please take the time to do that. To finish up on this first question and move on to another question. Okay, folks, we're going to move on to another question here that we'd like to pose for you and take about 5 to 7 minutes to talk as a group. Based on what you heard Matt sharing about what's going on at the high school presently, what suggestions, ideas, and requests do you have for the education that Arlington High School will provide in the future? So if we could kind of shift the conversation, and this may be very connected to your first conversation, but do a little bit of talking about that, and we'll see what we can capture over the next 5 to 7 minutes. Okay, we're gonna take about 1 more minute to wrap up our conversations. Okay, if we could wrap up our conversations. We want to make sure to build in some time to do a little bit of reporting out, as well as leaving some time for Q&A at the end. And to that end, again, if you have any questions or comments or thoughts that you want to share with us on the colored index cards, please take the time to do that, and then we'll be collecting them for the Q&A section. But at this time, what we'd like to do is go around to each group and hear just briefly, maybe sharing 1 or 2 of the top skills, mindsets, and character traits that your groups talked about in the first round of conversation here. Okay, it looks like we've enlisted a student to do some work for us. Okay, so we're gonna, if we could all focus our attention, we have, we're gonna hear from each table.
Okay, so who wants to speak?
We talked about a lot of things here, but one thing that we did discuss quite a bit was around social emotional learning and health and wellness, and making sure that the whole person is prepared really for later in life. Emphasis on both the body and mind. We talked a bit about some of the opportunities that are there for example, CPR certification or certification as a yoga instructor or whatnot, and how some of those types of expansive developments might help. We also talked a lot about the importance of curiosity and lifelong learning, that our students would be kind of self-motivated, not necessarily motivated by grades, but would feel a desire to pursue learning independently of the grade.
Okay,
system.
great. Thank you. And as we go around, I'm sure we're going to hear some similar themes, but try and add on to the conversation in terms of maybe things that we haven't covered, as it gets a little harder as we get around to this side of the room.
So we also wanted skills that kids would take forward for no matter what they're doing. So you wanted lifelong learning skills, and that came up in our conversation as well. We thought critical thinking, logical reasoning is important. Communication, those are things we don't know what jobs we're educating kids for, and if you have those skills, those transcend to any job. So research or media literacy, the way we gain and interact with information is changing so fast, but we want that to be a focus. We want kids to be able to be willing to take risk and make mistakes, and learn by that. And I guess those are our top 5 on that one. That was the first question.
Yes. Okay. Okay, and again, you don't have to share all 5. Save some for the other folks.
Right.
We echoed a lot of what everyone else said, and specifically one thing that came up was a lot about how to communicating effectively, both in writing and speaking, and understanding that there are different ways that people take in information, so that you need to be able to communicate that way. Also, we discussed some of the social emotional things and how it's important to learn how to not get lost in life, so that you have to be confident, you have to believe in yourself and advocate for yourself.
I'm trying to think what hasn't been covered. So we talked a lot about emotional intelligence and sort of connected it to collaboration with people, listening skills and communication skills, sort of all wrapped up as being very important to each other. Resilience, so having the ability to fail but then get back up and keep pushing and eventually succeed. Sort of, those are all very connected things, I think.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll show 3. That's okay. First one is the opportunity to do project-based learning, learn by doing projects. That was important to this group. Second one is the idea of building empathy and caring in students for one another and their community and being part of a larger global community. And the third is this idea we discussed of pairing critical thinking and open-mindedness, working in where there's a diversity of ideas and ability to learn and appreciate different points of view.
Great, thank you.
Well, that was interesting. We resonate with what's already been said. I just would mention we wanted to put out there cross-disciplinary opportunities for authentic learning, with the thought that you can set context if you're looking across disciplines, and also support a desire in students to learn, help students identify their passions, and sustain and nurture their passions.
We talked a lot at this table about working collaboratively as a team on a project rather than just solo. We talked a lot about not fearing failure, but learning and loving experimentation. And lastly, we talked about, because we think it's probably very important in the workforce, good organizational skills and learning how to do life skills, like getting out of a bank and knowing what to do with the banking that you're trying to do there, and staying out of debt, and all those good things that we need to learn as adults.
We talked about stealing other people's ideas, so we're going to take all of your ideas.
That's called collaborating.
We think that literacy and numeracy are important, and as part of that, there are certain fundamental knowledge you have to have in each area, whether there's a canon of literature or skills in mathematics or numeracy. In order to have that, then you go on to how you use those things and analyze from there. And then ultimately, I guess the fourth element of that would be how to communicate.
Great, thank you. Well, certainly a lot of overlap in your conversations and definitely in terms of the conversations we've been having over the last few weeks in our visioning sessions, echoing many of the same thoughts. And you know, the overarching question is how do we cover that basic literacy and numeracy and at the same time get at many of the important skills, social emotional skills and lifelong learning skills that have just been mentioned here. Now on to question 2 in terms of suggestions, ideas, requests that came up at your tables. And maybe what we'll do is we'll just start on this side and go around backwards. So we'll have. Sorry, guys.
It's all good.
Just do one. We would like to see all of us students that graduate from Arlington High School have at least one blended learning opportunity.
I'll do one. We wanted to talk about having high school academic and vocational blending. So you don't have to choose one discipline or another, but you could actually have experience doing both.
We had several. I'll just give a couple maybe. Our request was that it needs to be a system-wide approach, that you need to start teaching the skills for inquiry-based learning and identifying passions before you get to high school. So to look at this as starting skills early that will then be developed to their culmination of public school in the high school, and a variety of educational spaces and settings, small group, large group, hands-on, media center, because we have diverse learners who will learn in diverse ways.
So in our group, there was a really interesting insight about the snippet we saw of the high-tech high video. I'm realizing that we only saw a small portion of that video. It was noted that in those interactive collaborative groups, the boys were doing a lot of the talking and the doing, and the girls tended to be more passive and quiet. And it just led to a really interesting comment about thinking about this very different approach to learning that's project-based and collaborative and interactive to make sure that that's inclusive for boys, for girls, for introverts and extroverts, for students with and without learning disabilities. So we should think about that carefully as we design this sort of new and different potential model for a school.
So we had 2 high school students whose eyes lit up when they talked about the project-based learning that they were doing. They've only done a little bit in high school now, but they had ideas for many, many more things, and they also expressed frustration about the lack of flexibility in the classroom. You know, there's more things they wanted to do, and the class schedule is pretty rigid up until the very senior year.
We talked a lot about flexible attendance, which would translate into how we would use snow days. Maybe that we've got these early morning hours for the arts. Flexible attendance would also mean students are doing Moocs and stuff. Matthew kind of talked about that, how maybe not everybody has to come to school every day, but you can get your learning done outside of the actual building. So that was one of the things that came out of our conversation.
Internships came up a bunch at our table, and the idea that maybe as part of the building project on that site or somewhere else in town, we could have a town-leased startup incubator type space, and that the people who would rent would agree to extend internships to Arlington High School students and also send people in to do presentations about what's going on in their companies to Arlington High School students.
Thank you. So like a lot of the other tables, we talked about project-based and blended learning. But we talked, I think, mostly about the fact that in order for our students to be successful and for the success of any of these initiatives, we need our teachers to also have success in an environment in which they can operate effectively, whether through more professional development or teachers' rooms, common areas, adequate parking, or other amenities that will make them want to stay with the system and succeed with the students.
Now, and if we don't get to it in today's forum, we'll make sure to collect it and put it in the pool. Did someone?
He's writing more questions than anybody over here.
Playing with the cards. All right. Are there any questions?
Joe's gonna get the question.
Can you give a context for this slide?
That. Yeah, that.
Okay, you give him to Joe.
Is this on?
You give him to Joe.
Okay. Supposed to give this to Joe?
No, you're supposed to tell about the.
Hi, I have been asked to tell you what this is. This is the high school. It's photographed, I believe, by an overflying satellite owned by Google. And if you look at the high school, you can see that it's been made in pieces over time, and not always very planfully. So the building over on the left is the oldest building. That's called Fusco House. The fire department calls it Building A. That was built in 1914. It still has the original floor in the basement and many of the original fittings. It's also been divided up in order to increase the number of classrooms. So a lot of the classrooms have like diagonal walls and other such things like that. The building you see there labeled 1938, that's Column House, the famous columns with the clock tower, and also the wings that go off the back of that. That central part actually was the auditorium originally. But that's, in case you're wondering why this beautiful front, when you walk into the building, you can't even see where the windows are. They're in a stairwell in the back of a classroom. That's because similarly that was broken up to create the library and the cafeteria spaces. Oh, 1961 all the way over there on the right is the Low Auditorium, which got moved over at some point. And then you have in the back 1980 and 1960 on the left is the two gyms. And then 1964 in the back. That's called Downs House, originally the freshman building. That's a classroom building where we have the social studies department. And just one of the things to realize as you walk through the building is if you were crossing over, can I have the little pointer? Where is that pointer pointing from? It's hard to.
It's the red button. Yep.
So if you're trying to cross from here to there on like some of the floors, you can't actually do it because the library is in the way. So you have to go down and under and over. There's all sorts of weird ways to get through the building. These spaces here, this and right along there are called the links. And they're these long hallways. This one runs all the way down here and all the way along there. And this one runs along there, which don't have classrooms off of them. They're what we call attractive nuisance spaces. They're places where kids can go and hang out, and unless you send someone up there to clear them out, they're not likely to hear anything. We have all kinds of wonderful nicknames for many of these stairwells. This is my favorite. That's the gingerbread house. Bad things happen in the gingerbread house. Because people go there and nobody wanders through there unless we send somebody in there to get them. Is there more that you want me to say about the building? That was good. I can do a stand-up act that goes like an hour on this building.
Thank you. So we only seem to have three cards that have been passed in. So if anybody else had cards, just raise your hands. We can collect them. I'm going to go from easy to difficult, I think. So the first question is, will the historic look of AHS be preserved? I think that's probably for Laurie, I would think, for our...
I can only say we don't know yet. It depends on what our findings are as far as what it's going to take to renovate spaces and make them into the educational spaces that we need. So there's an interest, certainly, in certain aspects of the facade. I think additionally there's a lot of historic elements throughout the buildings, on the grounds. All of those things would be reincorporated in the building going forward. So.
Great. And there's another. Oh.
I was just, yeah.
More cards, okay. Thanks. And there's also another question about the possibility of a community use of the building.
Well, currently there's a lot of community use. The community adult ed is there. They use all sorts of parts of the building year-round, so that would continue. The auditorium will still be a wonderful asset for the town, the gymnasium. There is talk about an indoor walking track in the gymnasium, which would certainly be able to be open and used by the community. The library, I think really all the resources that are in the building that we're going to be designing for the high school will be open and available to the community through a lot of different programs. So.
Yeah, and we have talked also about creating easy access for the community after hours and on weekends to create a more public zone and private zone like you would have in a home, and be able to close off certain areas of the school at certain times of the day from the more public zones.
Thank you. And there is another question about what will our new athletic facility look like? Indoor track, which I think you just addressed, and pool, et cetera. Yeah. No pool. Okay. How do we ensure that students have sufficient time to develop and learn in-depth knowledge in writing, reading, math, science, where science includes both physics, chemistry, biology, as well as history, art, etc.? So I think it's a STEAM question.
So I often joke that there are many things within my control, but time and space are above my pay grade. The reality is there's more that we want to cover than is possible to cover. You know, the students, I think, commented that the schedule is really tight. Right now, if students take 5 academics, which most do because they want to get into college and because they need to meet the requirements, they're taking science, math, social studies, world language, and whatever the fourth one I forgot was English. And then they take PE because that's a state requirement. That leaves them 1 elective. By the time they get to their senior year, they're up to 2 electives. But there's not a lot of space in that curriculum if they want to take a college prep academic course. So we are working as much as possible to sort of be as efficient and to make the experiences students have as rich as possible. And then we, to offer enrichment possibilities. But one of the things that, this is an ongoing conversation with teachers, is you really have to burrow down to what is essential to cover. Because when you rush, when you cram content, pedagogy and understanding go out the window. And so there's this constant trade-off between, you want to do project-based learning. Why? Because students engage and because students get deeper learning. But it takes a long time to make a boat in order to learn fluid dynamics. I can teach you the algorithm in about 5 minutes. And so you have that trade-off of figuring out what is essential and where we're going to go deep. And I think that is really an ongoing conversation that we do in interaction with the kids in the community.
I would add one point, too, is that there's been a big change in the last couple of years, and increasingly so, is trying to have the electives be on a semester basis, so there's more opportunity to take a variety of courses and not just have them a year long, because that immediately limits the number of learning opportunities you can have beyond the ones you mentioned.
And while we're at it, the other thing is, part of what we're doing in terms of thinking about the Moocs and the global education certificates and the internships is getting better at figuring out ways of making sure students are having rigorous learning in other settings. And as we get better at doing that, we get better at offering multiple pathways to meet the same content requirements and to look at ways in which students can meet some of the graduation requirements in ways other than during class time. I mean, class time is not to be underrated. Our teachers are really good, and kids really get a lot out of being in the classroom with those teachers. I went to Williams College, and I always remember they used to say that the best learning experience was Mark Hopkins at one end of a log and the student at the other end of the log, and a book in between them. And I think forgetting that that is at the heart of what really happens well in a school is done at our peril, but we're trying to create more flexibility for all these other opportunities.
Thank you. We have one question. I think this is probably for Dr. Bodine. What is your vision for the whole district so that these great ideas mentioned here can become part of the district culture?
Well, that's a great question. One of the things that we have been looking at is what is the vision of what we would like to see our students have as their core competencies and dispositions, what we've been talking about this evening. When a student walks across the stage at graduation, what do we want them to know and be able to do? So in creating that vision, which we've been working on, you back that down. And so I can give you some examples of things that we're doing, which is leading to for each student to be that vision. If we want students to be collaborative as a goal, which we've talked about this evening, how do we begin that in kindergarten, first grade, third grade, and all the way up? And some of that comes from the environment in the classroom and how the learning environment is set up. So it's taking the vision and doing checkpoints all along the way as to whether what we are doing, the decisions we make, the learning environments we set up are consistent with making sure that that is our students. So we're engaged in that process, and in fact, we're trying this year to have as many people comment on this so that at the end of the year we have a vision. I don't think it's going to be a static vision. I think it will change. But you need to have that in order to do that work. Are we doing a lot of specific things around project learning? A lot of the work we're doing about the Gibbs School is trying to create some innovation around actually building into the schedule project time. It's turning out to be quite a challenge to schedule it, but those are the types of things. And I do think that in education, where you begin is you decide where you want to be, and then you work backwards. And we're in that process.
I'm going to group two questions. In the interest of time, I'm going to group two questions relating to construction, the MSBA process. How long will construction take, and how will students be accommodated during this time? And the second question is parking part of the MSBA process?
Well, those first two questions are very good questions, and unfortunately we don't have the answers yet. So we are just in the beginning of the study process. So ultimately, when the decision is made of what the project is, so as Dr. Bodine mentioned at the beginning of this, we're required to look at full renovation, renovation addition options, and all new construction options. And once it's decided which approach is the best approach, and by best it's usually coupled with meets the educational and exceeds the educational needs, and it's fiscally responsible. So looking at that analysis, once that's decided, that's when we're going to know how long the process will take. So how many phases and steps do we have to do to finish the whole project? And that ties into sort of what happens to the teaching and learning during that time frame. So we're looking at a number of things just on the periphery right now in terms of possibly shifting some of the programs elsewhere for during construction. I think many of you would agree that having a preschool on the site of a construction is not necessarily ideal. So we're looking at where that might be accommodated elsewhere in the system, again, during that time frame. So all of, sort of that analysis is happening, even though we haven't finalized yet what the final approach will be. So we are very much still at the beginning of all of this. So right now, as you're witnessing and part of. It's really, what are our educational goals? What are the spaces that we design for? And then how best to meet those goals. Oh, and the parking question?
I have that same reaction whenever parking comes up.
I'll say the question was sort of tied to MSBA. MSBA doesn't have anything against parking. I mean, they basically, like most of the funding mechanism, there are caps to things. So the site development costs will have a cap to it, which will likely meet or possibly exceed. I can tell you that they don't participate in structured parking. So certainly surface and paved parking is fine, but anything that's a structured, whether that's a separate thing or underground or any of the ways that you might imagine, they won't participate in those costs.
So I guess we're basically at time. We have a few more questions. Amy informs me that the remaining questions are going to be written up, put out on the website, and the answers will be provided on the website. There'll be opportunity there. So thank you very much.
I just want to invite everyone to our next forum, which is going to be different format than this one. It's going to be on Monday, March 5th, same time, 7 to 9, but we're going to start in the high school. And the first hour of that is going to be tours. So some of what you have heard about and you haven't seen the school, it'll be a great opportunity. And then we will come together, and David Stevens is going to, actually it's going to be an opportunity to maybe see some design patterns and, of where we are. The April forum, which is I believe April 4th, that forum is going to be an opportunity to hear where we are in terms of the sites. Remember, we have to look at various sites to see where else the high school could be, and we're going to have to look at all those sites and have pros and cons to them. So that will be one of the topics of that, the April forum, so you can be informed where that is going as well. So anyway, again, thank you very much for this evening. Really appreciate it. And there you have white cards there. These cards are, if you want to just quickly say, if there's anything that you would like us to, more information you would like us to provide you, please just leave the card on your table, write it down. We may address it at the March forum. We may address it on the website. We'll try to get answers for you. Okay? Thank you.